Well, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry I'm a couple minutes late. I was taking a picture with a bunch of high school students from across Virginia who are here with sponsored by the electric co-ops across Virginia. So they had some good questions. Hopefully you guys will have as good a questions. I hope everybody is staying as cool as possible with the heat dome. I do wonder at times with the heat dome hitting us with 10 days ago, record rains in South Florida, and now I understand the possibilities of 10 inches of rain in a tropical storm that's hitting East Texas. I don't know how any rational policymaker could still deny that our climate is changing and it's something we need to address. Let me get at three issues that I want to touch upon and then be happy to take your questions. First, and I've talked about this in the past, this is the FAFSA. This is the whole notion of how a student applies for student financial assistance. The old form was enormously complicated. It had over 100 questions, particularly for first-generation kids. Sorting through that form was a real problem. So Congress, a couple of years ago, passed a bill to say, let's take it from basically 100 questions to under 20. That's the good news. The bad news is that the implementation of that new law and the new form was way behind time. I've complained to the Education Secretary, Secretary Cardona, on this. I sat with students, financial aid officers, college administrators recently, and it's been a nightmare where a kid will get into one school or maybe a couple schools and not know how much financial aid, because some schools have caught up a little bit on their form, others have not. We may have students that are actually deferring for a full year because they're not being able to get the student assistance. I put another letter out to the Secretary today that we've got to get these problems resolved. This issue is going to come back up come fall as students apply again. It is good, all the things we've tried to do to the colleges, state government, federal government's done to try to assist students on student financial aid, but you can't make it a nightmare to sort through this information. So I'm going to keep the pressure on Secretary Cardona and the whole Federal Department of Education. We've got to make the application to college as easy as possible, and we've also got to make sure that sorting through the financial aid that in many ways makes kids able to go to college is in a clear form. I can tell you, as a person in my family to graduate from college, my parents only had enough money to help me a little bit through the first year, my freshman year of college. If I'd not gotten student aid, and frankly, if I've not also worked almost 30 hours a week for my sophomore through senior year of college, I wasn't able to afford to go. And not to date myself, but my whole college costs all in, tuition and room and board back when I went in the dark ages, was under $5,000. Even with our great public universities in Virginia, with room and board, it's mostly over 30 grand, and private universities oftentimes over 60,000. We've got to make sure that the student financial form is easier, simpler, and that people can get this information in a timely manner. Second issue is something that overwhelmingly passed. This is the fire grants. These are a series of federal programs that have provided funding to volunteer fire departments, professional fire departments, training, equipment. There's been, I think, 273 grants over the last couple of years to Virginia institutions, overwhelmingly supported. The fact that it's going to be continued to expanded will be the kind of direct support that we need for our firefighters. I would also say one of the things in the sausage making that goes on here, there is also in this bill that's passing today, it's already passed the House, is there will be some additional nuclear power funding. As you've heard me say many times before, the only way we're going to get to a clean, carbon-free energy generation in a way that meets our power needs, and they are growing enormously, even with just the existing data centers we have, without even adding new data centers, mostly driven by AI technology needs, enormous amount of power needs. This would put additional funding both in terms of licensing and how we can, I believe, bring nuclear power, particularly small modular reactors, back into the energy mix. It has nothing to do with the fire grant, but in the sausage making, it was rolled into this bill, and again, it will pass. It will pass. It already passed an hour ago. A third item I wanted to raise, and this is an issue that I've been working on for years. How do we make sure that we maintain availability of health care, particularly hospitals, in rural areas? We've seen about 30% of our rural hospitals across the country close over the last 15 years. In Virginia, we were lucky enough to have one hospital reopen that I think took a 6-year process, the Lee County Hospital in far southwest Virginia. Really proud that we got that reopened. But the truth is, rural hospitals are at such a tremendous disadvantage in terms of reimbursement rates. So I've had a bipartisan bill for years that would make sure that rural hospitals get at least 85 cents for every dollar that wealthier communities get in terms of reimbursement from Medicare and Medicaid. We've not passed that, but I've still got it out there. The legislation I want to talk about, though, that I've joined with a number of other senators, is saying a particular place where we have problems in rural health care delivery is obstetrics care, maternal, pre-care before you deliver a baby and delivering a baby. Hospital system after hospital system, unfortunately, has taken out or shut down their obstetrics care. And there are places in Southside Virginia where you got to literally travel hours before you could see an OBGYN. So, and this is not a new problem. I remember pumping up the reimbursement rates for OBGYNs 20 years ago when I was governor, but it's gotten worse. So this legislation would increase, again, the Medicare and Medicaid funding for OBGYNs. And even if we can't deal with all rural hospitals, we've got to make sure that across Virginia and across America, you shouldn't have to travel literally 2, 3, 4 hours to get obstetrics care. If we want to make sure that you can grow up and live anywhere in the Commonwealth, part of that will be broadband, part of that will be bringing good quality jobs, but we're not going to bring good quality jobs if a young future mom can't get the health care she needs. So that issue is, as well, is something that I hope we will come back to. And I think this legislation I've got with Senator Wyden and others that will increase the reimbursement rates for obstetrics in rural communities would take a giant step in that direction. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Laura, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Senator, our first question is Mitchell Miller with WTOP. Mitchell?
Okay, guys, I'm hearing nothing. Laura, anybody there?
Senator?
Stay with me. I will keep talking if, but
Senator, we're here. Senator, our first call will be Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
I hope everybody's got good 4th of July plans. How about this for a filibuster? I'm, this afternoon as well, I'm continuing to work. Got a series of items in intelligence that I'd love to tell you all about, but it would violate classified rules, so I won't be able to share those stories. But suffice it to say, the Intelligence Committee still keeps me enormously busy. Laura, are you going to be able to give us some questions?
Senator, can you hear me?
Okay. So
Okay.
I will continue to talk about issues of local and major significance. I'm sure somebody was going to ask me about the primaries. In the 3, I'll comment first on the 3 Democratic primaries. I think we've got 3 great candidates, and Mr. Vindman, in the 7th or 2nd district candidates, 7th district candidates, and I think we all are still waiting to see what happens in the Republican primary in the 5th district. If there's one thing I guess we can take away is that a Trump endorsement alone, even in one of our more conservative districts, does not necessarily guarantee an outcome, and we'll see what what ends up happening with that, what will appear to be going to a recount.
Senator,
All right.
I'm going to jump in. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Okay, excellent. Senator, we're going to jump to Mitchell Miller with WTOP. Mitchell? Okay, we're going to move on to Mark Robertson with Virginia Business.
Hey, Senator. How are you doing today?
Good.
Good. I'm working with Virginia Business on a story on Micron Technology and their planned expansion with their Manassas plant. My understanding is that they've applied for CHIPS Act funding for this expansion, and I was just wondering if you had an update on the timeline and what that would mean for Virginia and the national semiconductor industry.
Right. Well, Micron already has, and Micron are memory chips. You know, we've got as an important part of our overall chips industry. Micron has a world-class facility in Manassas already. It was a facility that's gone through a series of other ownerships earlier, but Micron has now been in, I think, probably north of 10 years there. I've been to the plant a number of times. And Micron has already been extraordinarily successful on CHIPS money in terms of their location in New York, where they've gotten literally billions of dollars, and they've received some CHIPS funding as well for their facility in Idaho. I'm supportive of the CHIPS funding, and I've been working closely with Governor Youngkin on this as well, and the state is leaning in. I am optimistic it will be a multi-$100-million investment. It will not only add additional jobs, but by continuing to upgrade the technology at the Manassas plant, it will make sure that we don't lose that facility. We've seen historically if a company doesn't continue to invest in these fabs, they sometimes will, frankly, technology will pass them by. So this CHIPS funding is extremely important, and I'm optimistic, and again want to thank the governor and the legislature for some of the state funds, because the state piece of the grant also helps us make a better case in terms of federal dollars coming in.
Senator, our next question is Vinay Simlat with Nexstar.
Senator, I wanted to ask you if you had any reaction to the FTC's referral of a complaint to the Justice Department about TikTok, and whether you think TikTok is violating the law here in the U.S.
You know, I saw that the complaint had been filed. I have to acknowledge I didn't look at the substance of the complaint, but as you may be aware, I've been leading the effort for over a year and a half to point out the challenges with TikTok. TikTok is one of the most addictive sites out there, and I've been particularly concerned because TikTok, unlike the other social media platforms, is ultimately controlled by a Chinese company, and Chinese law dictates that the Communist Party of China has priority over, customers, shareholders. At the end of the day, TikTok has to answer the CCP's requirements, and I feel 170 million Americans on TikTok. A lot of that data can be scraped, and there is no more powerful propaganda tool than TikTok, where, again, 170 million Americans, 90 minutes a day on average, and you can slightly twist that algorithm. And since many young people get their news from TikTok, we would never say we're going to turn Fox News and MSNBC over to the Communist Party of China. And that's why in an overwhelming legislative win, we had 80% of the Senate and 80% of the House vote to say TikTok needs to have its ownership transferred away or potentially be banned downstream. I hope that we won't have to implement the ban, and that it can be sold to an American or Canadian or French company, anyone that's just not ultimately controlled by the Communist Party of China. So while I've not seen the FTC complaint itself, I have grave national security concerns about TikTok. But I'd also say I have concerns about a lot of our social media companies. I think the Surgeon General, Murthy's comments the other day that potentially these social media companies need warning labels needs to be really considered. The amount of mental health challenges that our kids face based on social media is increasing, not decreasing. And frankly, Congress has been kind of pathetic in doing anything about it. A lot of us are on the Kids Online Safety Bill to make sure that at least some of this behavior that encourages, whether it's eating disorder, suicide, drug use for kids under certain ages, we could take that down. Europe has moved in that direction. We've got more than 60 votes in the Senate. That bill needs to be voted on. So I am concerned about all our social media companies across the board for some of these, particularly privacy and online safety concerns. I'm particularly concerned about TikTok because it's ultimate control by the Communist Party of China, both in terms of scraping American data and in terms of propaganda techniques. But that is a long answer around to the fact that I will look at the FTC filing and get back specifically to you because I'm not sure I've looked at the details on that.
Senator, our next question is Jernara Busey with 13 News Now. Jernara?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Senator, this is actually Janet Roach from Channel 13. Jernara is our assignment editor, but yeah, I was actually going to ask you about TikTok as well. You probably know that TikTok just filed the first legal brief challenging the potential ban. And I'm going to shift to something else because you kind of covered the whole social media thing.
Yeah, and I think the law will stand up to legal challenge, and I want to commend my friends in the House who helped draft this legislation. I would have done it slightly different, but I was supportive. But I do think it'll stand up to the TikTok legal challenge. But go ahead and ask your other question, please.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a report that just came out that said Biden has declining support among women. We've also been hearing these reports that he has declining support among African Americans. In your travels, and what are you hearing, and what do you think he needs to do to shore up support in groups that traditionally have voted heavily Democratic?
Yeah, good question. And I've seen those same polls, and I know some in the Biden campaign want to ignore the polls. I don't think you can ignore them. I think you have to take them seriously. And I think the president needs to continue to reach out to black and brown communities. I think he's dramatically increased that effort. In terms of losing support amongst women, I think when push comes to shove, that's probably not going to be the case, because I think one of the most important issues for women this year is the ability for women to have control over their own bodies and the freedom and the ability to have access to reproductive health care. And when you've got former President Trump bragging about a Supreme Court that took away the right to abortion with Roe v. Wade, when you see my Republican friends say they want to support right to contraception but then vote against a simple bill that would provide that, when we see my same friends who say, of course, we support IVF to allow families that can't otherwise conceive to have a family. Yet again, when that vote was put on the floor, all but 2 of the Republican senators voted against it. I think we'll get a little more clarity next week when the debate takes place. This will finally stop some of the speculation. I fear, or not fear, but I think when the American people actually take a moment and start to listen to what Donald Trump is saying, I think they're going to pull back, not just because of women's health care, not just because of questions around democracy, but here we've got a presidential candidate who's a convicted felon who spends 85% of every one of his speeches talking about himself and why he's still angry over slights to himself or trying to relitigate the 2020 election. I think Americans, regardless of partisan leanings, want somebody that's going to lay out what they're going to do, what a president's going to do for them and for the future of this country. And I generally feel when people focus on what former President Trump is saying that some of those polls will change. But I think that the president and his campaign needs to take those concerns to heart and aggressively reach out to those communities that need to hear more about his record. And in so many ways, I mean, there's been a record, whether it was the broadband deployment, whether it was the CHIPS bill we talked about earlier, whether it was the infrastructure that's finally rebuilding our roads and bridges and airports. And a lot of those dollars are still yet to hit communities across Virginia. The fact is the American economy is the single strongest economy in the world. That in itself those facts doesn't convince everyone, because still we've got to grapple with inflation. And I'm glad to see these inflation numbers are coming down. I do hope the Federal Reserve would go ahead and cut interest rates, because one of the areas that would have the most dramatic effect is around housing and the increasing price of rents. If mortgage rates came down, that would allow certain people to, sell. That would allow people who want to buy their first home. If we just don't have enough supply, if we get the wheels churning on the housing market, I think that will help bring down costs as well, particularly in housing. And that's going to require the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. So long answer, but fair question. And I do think at the end of the day that if the American people really focus on what Mr. Trump is saying day in and day out, and count how much time he spends on talking about their families and folks' needs, I think they'll think twice.
Senator, our final question is Emily Shawbaker with Cardinal News.
Hi, Senator. I'm with Cardinal News. We cover Southwest and Southside Virginia.
Oh, I know.
I'm working on a story. Oh, good. I'm glad you've heard of us. I'm working on a story about labor and delivery deserts in Southside Virginia, and I had a question about your Keep Obstetrics Local Act. I'm wondering how this legislation will specifically address recruitment and retention challenges faced by rural hospitals in maintaining OBGYN staff, and what other impacts do you think increased Medicaid payment rates would have on these rural hospitals that are struggling to keep labor and delivery services open?
Right. And as you know, I've got my list here someplace. There are half dozen hospitals that have literally shut down their obstetrics care. Part of that is due to, unfortunately, in some parts of Virginia, we've got declining population. But also, if you're an OBGYN, you can make more money if you're in a suburb or urban area. And this reimbursement rate differential is a real problem. I mean, OBGYNs are getting the attention right now, and that's why I've joined on Senator Wyden's bill to increase the reimbursement rate. That will also lead to the ability for the hospital systems and others to spend more money recruiting and paying OBGYNs. But that's, in many ways, the OBGYN problem is the tip of the spear. But as I've said, we've lost, a dozen plus rural hospitals over the last 20 years in Virginia. We've only reopened one, and I got to tell you, that took 6 years of my life to get the Lee County Hospital reopened. And that's why I think we need to deal with OBGYNs and the labor delivery shortage. But also, we frankly ought to make sure that all rural hospitals get at least 85 cents on the dollar of what a Fairfax hospital gets. If we can't diminish that discrepancy, and it is more expensive to live in Northern Virginia than it is to live in Danville or Abingdon. But if we exacerbate that gap, how are you ever going to recruit a doc to go to those communities? And if we don't have adequate health care, even though we're investing in broadband, even though I think there's a lot of businesses that want to relocate, and in a world where you don't have to live and work in the same community all the time, I think I'm praying and hoping, this is probably one of the reasons I got in politics in the first place, we ought to be able to, live anywhere in Virginia, and you shouldn't have to leave your hometown to get a good job. If we do everything else and we still don't then have quality health care provided, we're not going to attract the kind of jobs and keep the people that we need. So the increase on Medicaid reimbursement will be a huge step. I think we need to go further in terms of overall rural hospital reimbursement up to that 85 cents on every dollar that suburban hospitals get. But I'm glad you're doing a story on this. This is a problem. And I know you do Southwest, but this has particularly been a problem in a lot of communities in Southside. And it really has been shocking that in certain communities you got to go 2, 3, 4 hours in some places to see an OBGYN.
Senator, that was our final question.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much.